do anything.
Anything I want, everything I can. Some things you won't.
Do anything.
And I'ma do it till it's
Welcome
right.
to Breaking the Pattern, a podcast where we believe anything is possible when people put their minds to the task. Our mission is to help folks optimize their daily lives and reach their full potential by changing mindsets and creating small habits that have huge impacts. Our quest is to help people break harmful patterns of the past and move forward with a new outlook and a new way. I'm your host, Peyton Rose, and I'm joined by my co-host, Cody Schiestel. Hello, Mr. Cody.
Hey Peyton, glad to be back here after a short break.
Yeah, we've been on quite the odyssey over the last few, right? So you folks may not know this, but we've been in the field putting our money where our mouths are, and now we're back here to talk about what we've learned. And man, is there a whole lot to unwrap and reflect on.
Yep.
Can we recap in 30 seconds what we've done?
I'm not sure if that's possible.
Yeah, it's impossible. Well, what I can say is we've learned a lot. We've grown exponentially, and we've definitely run into roadblocks. There have been bumps in the road, but we keep getting back up and learning from the successes and the setbacks.
Well, when you set a good solid groundwork for your systems, then that's always what you can fall back onto, no matter what kind of wrench gets thrown into your system. That old adage, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems, rings true to me every day.
Yep. And I mean, the thing is, we've had some tremendous successes over the last 3 years, and I think we've transformed as far as the way we look at how we live through consistent action, habit, and implementing these systems. I think it's done is solidified what I felt was already an absolute belief in what we've been learning and what we continue to learn. So the last time we were in the podcast, we covered the book Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. That was an absolute cornerstone of concepts that changed my life, straight up. They were the idea that we should be positioning ourselves in a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset was so powerful, and it allowed me to really audit a lot of parts of my life that I might have been growth mindset around several different concepts and then fixed in so many others. Being able to go in and really diagnose and understand where I had this fixed mindset, this idea that the way things are is the way they're supposed to be or the way they're destined to be, was extremely powerful. Then we move that into this, what we're doing now, what we're talking about today. So during this episode, we're going to talk about the power of habit, briefly exploring some concepts and some powerhouse novels, some powerhouse research. One, the book titled The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Also, Atomic Habits by Mr. James Clear. And then we'll touch on the 5-second rule, which is a very applicable, I think, immediate applicable way of looking at, the idea of habit and how to create them, from Miss Mel Robbins. These books, for me, they were absolutely critical in helping me understand how these small actions taken consciously and consistently over time can transform my life. And so happy to share this information that we found and have been applying today with you guys. So let's get into it. Talking about Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. So one of the things I will say is, if you guys, we're going to talk about it a little bit, but go and get these books, read them, take the top level ideas and try to start implementing them in your lives. And I can guarantee you're going to see a massive difference.
Absolutely, and that goes for any book that we're recommending here on this podcast. Like, we wouldn't be recommending it if that was not the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the Power of Habit, the big takeaway from that is this keystone habit.
Yeah.
You've got this core habit that's going to influence all of the smaller habits of your life.
Right.
And when you find that critical habit, it's something that means a lot to you. Maybe not to other people, but
Yeah.
it's a good example is running or jogging. And then if that really becomes your mindset, improve your running, improve your jogging, there's a lot of associated improvements that come from that. Okay, I'm a smoker. Okay, it's getting in the way of my fast run, my long run. There's this smoothie that help improve. There's all these side effects of trying to be the best runner that improve the core of all of your habits around.
So let's go back to that. Let's go back to keystone habit, right? So let's look at it in the from the opposite effect. Keystone habit for most people. Let's just explain that first and foremost, right? Your keystone habit is that one habit, that one thing that can essentially change your life, right? So let's say running. I'll go back to smoking, right? So I think you hit on that. That's a perfect example. You could put this with around fast food or potato chips, right? But if your keystone habit right now is whenever you get stressed, you go have a cigarette, or whenever you feel anxiety, you go have a cigarette. That is, that's a bad keystone habit. But that is a keystone habit, right? Like it's that one initial habit that kind of rolls into everything else, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All of your other habits, or all the habits in your life, they break up into a three-part mechanism called like cue, response, and reward. It's so easy to keep harping on the cigarette example because
it's a great
it just
one.
makes a
Yep.
great because the cues for your cigarettes, like it's location, time, how you're feeling, other people's actions, and all of these different. You smell the aroma in the air. You see someone pull a pack out. You get emotionally angry, and
you get dropped a deadline on your desk that you weren't expecting, right?
Yeah.
Any kind of cue, any trigger, right? Yeah.
And then so what a lot of people have is like when that does become your keystone habit, smoking a pack a day, 2 packs a day, whatever, like your routine is always to go to that. So you get your cue, your routine is to smoke a cigarette to get your reward of your nicotine fix, and so what you have to do is to hack the routine.
Yeah.
You get you can't control your cues.
Can't do that. Yep.
You could lock yourself in a box and not come into contact in the world. Yeah, you can control your cues then. Otherwise, you're going to walk down the street. You're going to smell the cigarette. You're going to see someone smoking one. And unless you modify the routine, because this is ingrained into your brain. It's every time you repeat the habit, it becomes ingrained into you can't remove that pattern. It stays in your head. All you can do is modify the routine associated with it.
And in that habit routine, there is this craving for a reward, right? So that immediate reward you get from smoking a cigarette is a stimulation. What we're looking at is replacing that routine. Your cue is going to happen. Replace the routine with something that is, well, one, positive, something that's going to give you a benefit. Now that's tough. And getting into that, because we know that once a habit's well established, dopamine spikes there and you're going to go to it every time, right? So once we start to replace that routine right after the cue with something that used to be unhealthy, now we're doing something that's healthy, we start building patterns, rewiring patterns in our brains that allow us to now, when we get cued, to pivot to something more positive that's going to help us. And we're using cigarettes, but it may be food. It could be any list of routines that you drop into, that you default to, that allow you to get that reward, right? So what we're trying to do, what you have to do individually first, right, is identify what keystone habits you have that maybe aren't, absolutely optimized in your life, and start looking at how can I replace these routines from these cues, right? So you have that example from Duhigg, right? Marco the monkey, right? So talk about Marco the monkey, right? The monkey on our back.
To circle back to the cue response reward part of Duhigg's book, the researchers would have Marco complete these different tasks, like pushing a button or something of that nature, and they would start testing the you get this dopamine rush before your reward. So they were testing the habit. So he goes and presses the button, his cue, to and then the button's the cue, and then he responds by pressing the button,
Yep.
and then he gets the reward of the sweet juice.
Right.
And so they would mess around with the reward mechanism on that. So the monkey gets this huge dopamine rush in anticipation of the reward of the juice, and so they would water it down, give them half as sweet, or delay the juice, or not give it to him at all. And the monkey's response was immediate aggression, anger, or straight into depression from the dopamine rush and not getting the satisfaction. Kind of back to the Pavlov dog thing that everyone knows about. He'd ring the bell, the dogs would start drooling, and they're in response to the bell, already in anticipation of the treat.
Yep. Yeah, and that's going back to that, right? So looking at that, where that dopamine spike actually hits, it's with the cue. It's not with the action. So one of the things about establishing positive, reinforced actions and habits, we have to always note this, that establishing a positive habit is very, very difficult. And keeping a positive habit, keeping a positive routine after a cue is also very difficult. It's very easy to break a positive pattern and default to some negative action that we would take in the past. And that's where the keystone habit really comes into play.
Yeah, there's these automatic mechanisms. Yep. Like we walk into the routine, and it's just automatic. We don't think about it. It's easier, and that's the way our minds are set up. And unless we throw a wrench into it, actively aware of this phenomena, we are subject to it.
And so for any serious change or habit to actually take place, you have to have a structured plan. You've got to have a plan of action that you go into these cues with that can reinforce positive actions on the backside instead of those negative actions. We really believe in writing these down, right? Write them down, write down your plan, write down what your negative routines are now and how can you change those, and then plan those contingencies as well. So instead of saying like, I'm going to quit smoking cigarettes, well, that's a great goal and all, but what systems are in place, right? And that goes on. I know we're skipping ahead to atomic habits here, but what can you do to change or to supplement those negative routines and now put in a positive one? So let's just say let's roll down on with smoking, right?
Yeah.
So you're cued. Your usual response is to go and eat a potato chip, have some nicotine, have some sort of negative, routine or response. If you can start to change that with Q is stress. Now, instead of me going into my general basic default pattern and system, I'm going to replace this with something like, I get cued, now I'm going to do 5 push-ups, or I'm going to take a walk around the block. You start replacing those negative actions, negative routines with something positive. What I've seen is you may not be able to change everything right then and there, like right on. You're never going to change it on the spot. But what you're doing is you're starting to diminish, right? Diminish those negative routines that you generally default into.
Small incremental improvements. There's no huge, milestone like breakthrough that you get. It's small incremental 1% improvements each day.
Yep. And so, one of the things that we found was behind that cue, what are you doing? What's sitting there to help you move into this new routine, right? So for me, when I was going through stressful times, I'm, in the past, I smoked cigarettes. This is a one that's near and dear to my heart. Like, there was a time where I was so stressed, trying to start a new business, have a successful family life, successful home. My default was, when I got stressed, man, I could step outside, have a couple of puffs on a cigarette, come back in, and felt like I could deal with whatever stress was being triggered or cued at the moment. What I learned was, if I could just change that little pattern right there, right after the cue. If I could now, whenever I get stressed, I'm walking outside. I mean, at the time, I remember I had the offices in the garage, right? And so what I did was I opened the garage door. So that was that next response for me, was opening the garage door. Once I opened the garage door, then I had to take a step outside. And then I took a walk. And that walk, even if I had to do it 5 times in a day, after a time started to replace. That was the transfer, right? That I was changing that keystone habit from stepping outside, taking a cigarette, to opening the garage door and taking a walk around the block, right? And that continued into, okay, now I'm taking a walk around the block. I may take a jog around the block. And then it became, I live, at the time I lived next to a mountain. And so I started walking to that mountain and just walking up a couple hundred meters, right? And that snowball effect, turned into something much, much greater. And guess what? That negative keystone habit that was sitting there kind of holding me back was completely transformed. Didn't take as long as what you would think. But, in the moment, hard to determine, hard to see and imagine what was coming on the backside of it all.
And so to move this on to habit change, a good take from Duhigg is, any serious habit change must have a structured, detailed plan. You need to write it down, and you need a plan for contingencies.
Yeah.
If saying that I'm going to start running works for you, then good for you.
Right.
But that doesn't work for me or many other people.
Right.
I schedule time to run. Like I put an alarm that says, put your shit on, and for me to go run. And if it's too cold, raining, whatever, I've got shit inside, and it's no excuses.
Right. Yeah. And that was a big thing for me, was understanding that, okay, first off, let's establish the habit is not running. The habit is not getting healthy, right? The habit isn't lifting weights. There's no habit in doing hard things. You can't make your habit, the actual habit, is what happens right after the cue, right? So, for instance, we talked about this at length. For me, one of the things that really transformed me, one, I was able to transform out of, like, kind of drop the stress cigarette smoking and replace it with taking a walk. Well, after a while, it became a routine to where I felt incomplete if I didn't do something physical, right? Then I had to learn that it wasn't the physical thing that was the habit at all. It was right after the cue. What was sitting there that made me transform into that person that's saying, okay, I'm going to do this now, right? And so as I developed, I'd put the kids to bed, right? And I had kind of dedicated myself to this physical regimen. But if I just put the kids to bed and went down and sat on the couch, it'd be over with for the night. What I did, and where I found the true habit, was setting my running shoes down at the bottom of the steps and then coming down. And if I was going to circumvent or just, like not go through the habit, I'd have to step over those running shoes, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that thing that you say, once I do this, it's that thing that's sitting there. And for me, it's a tangible cue, like running shoes. Pick your tool, right? Pick your weapon. But what is it during your routine that says, for me, it was like, I put the kids to bed, I come downstairs, my running shoes are at the bottom of the stairs, I put on my running shoes, and now I have turned on the mechanism. I have to go outside, right?
Yeah.
Period. I was making excuses after that, right?
Yeah. Your alternative is to tell yourself, I'm lying to myself. I told myself I was going to do this earlier, and I'm not. And then you have to make that conscientious effort and place those aside. And
put those shoes on.
I don't consider myself extremely disciplined, but like that's not something I can stomach to myself.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to consciously step over these shoes because I just don't want to do it. Right. And now you're making, you give yourself the power to make the conscious decision to, if you just absolutely don't want to go through with it, you're now making the conscious stepping over the shoes. You're not going to do it. And that right there is a very, very powerful mechanism.
Yeah, you need a clear cue and reward to start a new habit. But before I was a regular hiker, I go and hike these 14ers and Bierstadt and whatnot.
Evans.
Yeah,
Long
and but before I was a regular hiker, I would make plans to go on hikes, and I would wake up. I'd spent beforehand every single possible tangible variable prepared for, over prepared for, in every possible way. And then in the morning, I would still manage to make an excuse up to why I don't need to, sometimes, I'd muster the energy to go. Sometimes I wouldn't. And I'd heard some tricks that worked for others, such as, setting up an alarm that said, get the fuck up, or, getting your gear prepped the night before.
Yeah.
But, the first trick that really did it for me was, the same example like what Peyton just gave with the hiking shoes. I'd have those literally in front of my door in my bedroom. I'd close it the night before, put those shoes right there, and then I would have to tell myself in the morning, I'm not doing everything that I had put out yesterday that I was so excited to do, and then I'd have to put those aside. And
I'll append a note to that. I remember putting on my shoes, and I'm going to skip forward a little bit to Miss Mel Robbins and the 5 second rule. I would put those shoes on, and I would have to sit there on the couch some nights and count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 like multiple times. I remember one night it took me like 15 minutes of counting down, and then finally I was like, I am going to do this, right? And so, there are going to be times when it's so tough, but if you can take the concepts from these books, especially with that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, take that and really, really dedicate yourself to it, you will eventually stand up, walk out the door, and get in your run, get in your walk, get in an exercise no matter what. Skipping forward, right, to James Clear and the Atomic Habit. Atomic Habits, what Clear did was he took Duhigg's system and he added one more element to it. So he called it cue. So for Duhigg, it was cue, response, reward, right? James Clear came and brought cue, craving, response, and reward. And for him, that craving, right, the craving was, from what I understood, reading the book several times, is that craving, that dopamine spike you get at the beginning, that's kind of the most critical element in the whole process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got like this clear emphasis on what you want to do, right? And you're now replacing these negative habits or these negative responses with positive responses. You've got a very clear emphasis on the importance of focusing on this system that you're creating. Not necessarily the goal of I'm going to quit smoking or I'm going to get in shape, I'm going to go running, but now I have this system in place that says I put my shoes down, I put them on, and I step out the door.
But
right?
but to really emphasize on that craving aspect that
Yeah.
Clear focuses on. Back to that example about Marco the monkey. Like he would, if that dopamine rush did not get satisfied by the reward, he would get angry or depressed severely.
Yep. And that's an immediate consequence of the whole thing, right? Because if you're not replacing that response with something healthy, and even when you do, there's going to be moments in that, especially in the beginning moments of starting a run or starting to implement some new positive habit or reinforce some positive action, you're going to not feel like doing anything, right? It's going to be very, very easy to default back to whatever it was you're doing in the past. And for Clear, one of the things he really focused on was that 1% rule, right? And this is probably, I swear by this being the toughest part of it all, because we're all wired we want, especially now in this day and age, and the way that we've all kind of been wired and programmed, we want immediate feedback, right? The immediate feedback loop. We want an immediate, what is it? I don't know.
Yeah, there's. I think we often think the return on our efforts are linear,
right?
When very often they're logarithmic or exponential, and so you don't with a logarithmic return, you don't really see a lot of it to begin with, and it's still building up, and it's but it comes on the back end more.
The power of the compounding effect, right?
Yeah.
So with the 1% rule, the idea is that you work in 1% increments, right? So if you improve or implement a 1% action daily, right? So today I'm going to walk around the block. That's my 1%. Tomorrow I'm going to walk around the block plus a couple more steps, just to put this really basic, right? So that 1% rule, if you start doing 1% better each day, right? So if we can improve our lives and our routines 1% each day, by the end of 1 year, if you add up 1% over 365 days, what do you have? 365% increase, right?
Yeah, and there's a faith element of this too.
Very true.
You've got to kind of blindly follow that. I mean, one side of me is like, oh yeah, that's easy, that's so obvious.
Right.
You improve 1% every day,
yeah.
And
yeah.
it 365% a year improvement, right?
Yeah.
But and then there's the other side of me. It's like, I don't see this. I'm not seeing this. Where's this improvement I'm looking for?
Yep. And with Clear, what I like is that identity-based focus, those identity-based habits. So with him, it's what type of person are you trying to become, right? Who are we trying to be? What we have to change our self-beliefs. We have to change that mechanism, those systems. And that is where the absolute power lies. It's you're becoming the type of person. I am the type of person that even when it's hard, I go and run. I am the type of person that in business, when the team is down, I am the one that is the type of person who's going to lift that team up, right? So we're becoming the type of person we really want to be, that we really ought to be. And that's where that identity-based habit really comes into play. And for me, it was defaulting to that, right? Because you're not going to get this right 100% of the time. I'm lying if I didn't say there were many days when sitting on the couch doing the 5-second rule didn't work, right? But what I knew is the next day I'd get another chance to make that change, right? And so I knew and really truly believed that I was becoming the type of person who quotes around it, runs, right? Or the type of person who leads others. And that, if you start telling yourself like that, that power of the power of suggestion around like, I'm the type of person that does this, that's going to take effect, and it's going to start influencing your decisions.
And then what comes first and foremost on that is your environment. Like
Absolutely.
if you allow all sorts of people into your life and into your mind that could care less about any of that, or even worse, or belittle you for dreaming of being larger.
Yep.
All of that is negative, and puts you back into those old habits.
Yeah, it's going to leave a trace.
Yeah.
You can't beat it. And this, I swear, I'm going to probably say it 175,000 times. Who you surround yourself, the environment you put yourself in, the people that you surround yourself, those people are going to influence you no matter what. So one of the things that we learned is, and you're going to hear this from, I would say, probably anybody who's had any level of success, they look around and the people that they've surrounded themselves with are people that believe in them, people that are going to root for them, people that are going to keep them accountable, right? They're not going to let them fall off the bandwagon. And that's where, like, your circle, the circle of people around you, I swear, is such an important factor in all of this. And that's a tough one, because there may be people you have to drop out of the system that just aren't, are never going to be supporters in that, right? And that's something none of us, it's a tough one to face. None of us really want to face that.
And your environment also comes down to your workspace. I mean, if your idea of getting hard work done is sitting crisscross on your bed with a laptop in your lap, there might be a better environment to be productive and to change your habits and to move.
Move forward in a positive way. So for clear and atomic habits, you've got these 4 elements to it, right? So your cue, one of the things that he always says is make the cue obvious. He kind of retained the concept of the cue, but that Duhigg created, but he emphasized making the cues of positive habits obvious to encourage this initiation of the start of this new habit. And he also suggested that making the cues of bad habits invisible to avoid being triggered to perform them was really, really important. You had that great example of your grandmother, right? Like, that was an awesome one, the one you were talking about with your grandmother.
Yeah, when for her to quit smoking, she had still kept her cigarettes, but she had like locked a cabinet and put the key in a different room, and so it gave her a good 30 seconds to probably, or to a minute to really go, okay, am I really trying to smoke this cigarette? And it made it inconvenient.
Yep.
It's like if you keep them in your shirt pocket, I mean, it's, you pull it out and step outside,
And so what with James Clear in Atomic Habits, he wanted to make that craving, the backside of that cue, attractive. How do we make the craving attractive? So he replaced routine with the idea of craving to focus on the motivation behind the habits. And he recommended that people make good habits attractive, and that increases the desire to perform and go through with those routines and new actions. And what you do what eventually occurs is going through those positive reinforcements. It makes those bad habits unattractive, and it decreases your motivation around engaging with those bad habits. Then you have your response, right?
Yeah, think of like if you hate working out, maybe a good motivation is, okay, I'll give myself a little treat afterwards, something that I like, a smoothie, a chocolate, or
I've always sworn by the reward after, especially in the beginning, right? So if you need help on reinforcing good habits, it's giving yourself the reward afterwards that allows you to kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say revisit bad habits, but I wouldn't say like go run then have a cigarette. But you could eventually. Those cigarettes are going to disappear as well, right?
That's not a bad example, because if you really love having a drink, if you really love having a beer or something, you could make that your reward.
Yeah.
But I say that carefully.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think all of this is so nuanced, right, and so biological, right? So definitely not promoting if you have an alcohol addiction or problem or any sort of very, very negative addiction that you go do the positive thing and then default to the negative thing. But allowing yourself a reward.
Although if you did have an alcohol problem, if you required yourself to run 10 miles for each beer, I'm not sure what the results of that would be.
You wouldn't be drinking beer much longer, Absolutely not, right. And so that's where, you move into the idea of making that response to that routine easy, right? The component that aligns with Duhigg's routine is that these clear stresses, and he stresses the importance of making the action easy to do, and that increases your adherence of that action, or your ability to go through that action on a more consistent basis. And for bad habits, the strategy is, how do we make this action difficult? Your grandma, locking them in a box somewhere, right? Like, very, very important to make those really good reinforcing habits very easy to get involved with, and making those tough habits really, really, really tough to get into the groove of. And then you have your reward, right? So you're making, on the backside of this, you try to make that reward satisfactory.
And this is what really comes back to environment. Like, what could be
100%.
amazing about the reward? Wouldn't it be awesome if you didn't even need a smoothie or a chocolate after thing? If you could just high five a fellow friend who's rooting for you, who's excited that it's really a reward could be that simple.
Yeah, checking back in with accountability, right? Like, so we're checking in, be like, man, I did that. I got that done. And having somebody there on your side to be like, yeah, man, nicely done. Like you went and did that. I know that wasn't easy, and you should be proud of yourself for doing it. And so for him, making that reward satisfactory, and I've found that as we implement these rewards, these routines, the satisfaction that comes on the backside, I have never went out and did a run or a workout or a competition or anything and came back and be like, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. That was a total waste of time, right? Never with a positive one. I remember in the past definitely coming back in after a cigarette and feeling like shit. Feeling like, man, I don't know why I just did that. I just did it, right? But I've never had that response from something extremely positive. And I think that was absolutely foundational for me to understand that and like really experience the satisfaction of an action well taken, a goal reached. Today my goal was to run a mile. I reached it. I've never been like, man, that goal was stupid. Like, I wish I wouldn't have ran that mile today, right? So one of the things we want to come up with is strategies for good habit formation, right? And so we make it obvious. Make that good habit obvious. It's clear emphasis on the need to make the cue of a good habit obvious in that environment you're in, right? And then we make it attractive. We enhance the appeal of positive habits. We make those compelling. I know that after I run this mile, I'm going to come back. My lungs are going to feel good. I'm going to feel good. I'm going to be energized. I'm going to be ready to conquer the day or conquer my evening routine, whatever it may be. And then we make it easy. We reduce the friction around making that habit stick and really, really ingraining that habit into our routine. So for me, it was like setting those shoes down, just knowing like, man, all I have to do is go put those shoes on, the mechanism's turned on, and now I'm off to a positive habit or a positive action, right? And then we make it satisfactory. So we make it obvious, we make it attractive, we make it easy, and then we make it satisfactory. We ensure that there is an immediate satisfaction that makes that habit stick. So every time I started the running process, I got 400 meters down the road or up the mountain, I was feeling good. I was already in another mindset, right? Another frame of mind that was really I knew this was something that was great for me, right?
So Peyton, did you know children who can resist marshmallows do better in life?
Ah, the good old marshmallow test, right?
Yeah. So this may come familiar to some people. There was a test that scientists did on like about 100 kids or so.
Yep.
And they laid out 2 marshmallows in front of them and told them that, or they laid out 1 marshmallow in front of them and told them that they were going to leave the room, and when they came back, that they would get 2 if they were able to wait.
Yeah.
And the study just, broke up the children into those 2 groups of the children who waited to get the second marshmallow versus the ones who ate it immediately once the researcher left. And they came back 20 years later, and all of the children who were able to resist the urge to eat that 1 marshmallow to get the 2 were doing better in life.
Yeah. And that's, that's another one that, that I feel like I say all the time, and I will continue to say for the rest of my life, is that if you can temper that short-term pain for that long-term gain, that right there just in itself is transformational. Most people are going for the quick wins, the wins they can get right now that they can see, feel in the moment, and they are missing a vast opportunity in having exponential growth in the future because they can't circumvent that momentary pain, right? Like they can't put that, they can't subside that. And that's something that if I was to preach one thing, if I was to preach 2 things, it'd be the people that surround you and being able to suffer that short-term pain for that long-term gain, right? Yeah, it's tough. Really tough.
So, how can someone identify which habits they should focus on forming?
Oh, great question. So I would look at, this is going back to that self-audit, right? So what I did, and I didn't invent this in any way, shape, or form. We're standing on the back of giants here, but first is identifying what negative keystone habits you have established in your life, right? So I have this negative keystone habit. I default to this negative thing, this negative routine. Identify those routines first and start to troubleshoot how you can implement positive routines on the backside of those cues, right? Like, so that's going to be the very first step, is saying, okay, I notice that I do this when I come home from work every day. I just immediately go to the couch and sit down and start watching Netflix or whatever, right? Or I start browsing on the internet, social media. So instead of coming back, I've noticed that to be an issue because now it takes up 2 hours of my evening or an hour of my evening. I could be doing something else with that. So instead of me going and sitting on the couch when I get home, I have to walk past, I'm using the shoes as an example, I have to walk past the shoes and make the conscious decision that I'm not going to go do something positive for myself, right? So for me, it's like really, really understanding what negative habits you have in place. And more specifically, there's probably just one major one that is going to have a cascading effect. Understanding what that is and starting to change the routines around that cue, if you can do that, you're going to see a trickle effect around your whole life. I remember when that happened, when I started seeing that trickle effect happen, and my productivity went through the roof, the way that I felt about myself and my life and my business and my family and things, and everything started to change because that one keystone habit that used to be a negative one now is a positive one that serves as a guiding light, critical.
And what do you think the role of self-discipline and willpower is in developing and maintaining good habits? So
self-discipline versus motivation, right? That's what we always come back to, because motivation's easy to have for a hot second. We can all listen to a Goggins podcast or listen to some inspirational speaker or read some motivational book, take some class, and we have some motivation for a short period of time. But that motivation always tends to fade. And what we have to fall back on is what disciplines we put into place, right? And so self-discipline is absolutely critical. And that's where 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 Mel Robbins comes in. You should definitely read her book. Read all these books: Atomic Habits, The Power of Habit, and The 5-Second Rule. But being able to now put in a self-discipline that says, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to do this. Or I've got my shoes set down here. I'll sit on the couch, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to go put those shoes on and I'm walking out the door. That discipline is absolutely critical. Not easy. Matter of fact, it's so hard. It can be so hard sometimes. But if you're making your routine, the cues, if you're making things attractive around the person you want to be, the type of person you want to become, now you start to see small transformations, those 1% incremental changes that occur and compound over time. And before you know it, you look around and see, man, I have changed. And I've not changed just a little bit here. This compounding effect has added up to something major, right? It's become something pretty major. And that right there, fundamental. Absolutely fundamental in the process.
And then riding on this 1% incremental concept, what are some effective ways to set achievable goals that support the development of these positive habits?
Yeah, that is another very, very powerful and important question. So for me, I think just in general, like biological, because this is all biological, right? Like one of the things we've also learned, and we work with the Flow Research Collective as well, and they're big proponents of this. It's not going to be, not going to be easy. The idea that we are making these little attractive incremental gains, right? How are we now implementing these small structures we put in place? If you make it simple, it makes it easier, right? So you make it just simply, I put on my shoes. The mechanism turns on. I have to go do something. And, right, so getting back to that, one of the things I find with, especially in our society now with people these days, we try to make these giant, like, umbrella changes in our lives. So, we always go back to that, the New Year's resolution, right? So my New Year's resolution, I'm going to change my life, right? And so what people do is they set these goals, right? Read Atomic Habits and learn about goals. They set these massive goals, and then what is required for those massive goals is a complete life change immediately. So they change their diet, they change their eating routine, they start to go to the gym, they are going to bed at 8 o'clock, they're getting up early, and that lasts for about 5 days. Right? 5-6 days. And then because they've tried to change so much at once, they get overwhelmed immediately and default back to whatever it was. And that is, I think, where the problem lies. If we can say for ourselves, we can understand what that negative keystone habit is and say, okay, I'm going to do this one small thing each day to change or to manipulate that negative keystone habit, turn it into something positive. That right there that's where the gold is, right? That's where we start to really see this long-term change. And so if I was going to say anything, it's what we call micro habits, right? So it's that micro habit. Like, what is your micro habit that you can start to implement? And that's where we came with 10 wins in 10 minutes. To be able to, the first 10 minutes of your day, do 10 tiny things that you can stack each day that only takes you 10 minutes. You walk out the door with 10 wins under your belt, right? And it took you 10 minutes. That's small. That's tiny. You can always set aside 10 minutes in your morning before anyone else wakes up to get 10 things done, 10 small actions done that are going to put you on the right path for that day. And that is, that's something that is so important in trying to change these negative keystone habits, turn them into positive ones, is having these small, and understanding, believing in the process that taking these small actions, these 1% actions day in, day out, is going to turn into something greater. And I mean, there are tons of people who are living proof of this system, and huge if we do it over time. Absolutely. Okay, so to bring this full circle, now you have the Power of When from Dr. Michael Bruce. You've got the Right Mindset from Dr. Carol Dweck, and you're ready to start making changes in your actions and in your habits, given to you by Mr. Charles Duhigg, Mr. James Clear, and Ms. Mel Robbins. Join us on this next podcast, Podcast 5, Breaking the Pattern, where we're going to review Making Your Bed by General William H. McRaven and Essentialism by Mr. Greg McKeown. Those right there are going to be absolutely incremental in the next step in this journey. They are powerful, powerful studies, powerful books. We absolutely want you to join us on those. Our link's in the description. Check it out. This is Mr. Peyton Rose and Mr. Cody Schiestel signing out, always telling you to optimize everything, go forth, and conquer. Thanks for joining us.